and welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. This week, I'm doing an interview with Stephen Chin from JFrog. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. So I run the developer relations team at JFrog. I also am really well known in the Java community, and I'm super excited about being on your podcast.
Awesome. Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out. So JFrog, do you want to just explain a little bit? I've looked a little bit at I think it's Aritfactory. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So Aritfactory is our core offering. It's a binary repository for modules, for containers, for different sort of artifact types which you want to store in your DevOps workflow.
Right.
And we have a larger platform. So we have a CI/CD solution called Pipelines. We have a security solution called X-Ray. We have distribution, authentication, all of the usual things you need for building a larger DevOps pipeline.
Awesome. Nice to meet you too, Troy.
You too.
All right. Well, yeah. So do we want to dive in and talk about Aritfactory, or do we want to talk about some of the other offerings you have, or just talk about JFrog in general and kind of cover all of it? Yeah. So I think there's a couple things which are interesting to talk about in general. So, Troy mentioned this a little bit, but I run the community outreach developer relations from JFrog side. And I think we've had a couple big announcements and things which have come out, which are particularly relevant for the larger DevOps and developer community. Okay.
One of them is our Go Center, which is a public repository for any Go developers to store their modules. It can act as a proxy for your Go code, so it can be used to look up dependencies, and it has a lot of good information on dependencies between different modules, security issues on different modules, and then it lets you do searches and find information about different Go modules. And I think we're in the process of also introducing some advanced searches, which lets you search on things like, the number of stars in the GitHub repo or the popularity of projects or other stuff if you're trying to figure out which modules are the right ones to pick up for your project.
Right.
So that's one thing which I think is interesting, and it's freely available to anybody who wants to use it as a public repository. It automatically builds the Go modules and then lets you just link them up as dependencies in your project. And the second thing which we announced a couple weeks ago is the JFrog Container Registry. So this is a free version of Aritfactory, which specifically lets you store Docker images and Helm charts. And it's a great way for folks to kick off their cloud native workflows using Aritfactory or the JFrog Container Registry as a single source of truth for all of their container images. So it acts as a normal, Docker registry. You can push and pull images from it. Gives you advanced metadata, so you can see information about the build and how the build was run, the version of it, the dependencies. It'll actually go into the Docker image and it'll peel it apart, and it'll tell you what Debian or RPM bundles are installed in the operating system. For any applications installed, it'll open the wars or the jars or other modules you have for Python or for Node.js or other languages. And it'll look at the dependencies of those and tell you if you have any security vulnerabilities or issues. And I think one of the challenges with maintaining good Docker images and doing deployments is that the moment you create a Docker image, you're guaranteed to have hundreds of vulnerabilities within a couple weeks of just letting it sit there. Wow. There's so many, if you think about it, you have so many packages installed on the Linux side. your own application depends on all these third-party dependencies. So you can just scan existing production artifacts, and you find so many security vulnerabilities, which are usually easy fixes, right? Just upgrade the package you're depending upon, or upgrade the dependency. But if you're not keeping track of it, it can be quite hard to keep your production with as few security vulnerabilities as possible.
Right, that makes sense.
So I think those two in particular are good things to talk about. So our centers, which are really community focused, and also the JFrog Container Registry, which is a new free offering. The other big product announcement we've had in the past few months is JFrog Pipelines, which is a continuous integration, continuous delivery solution. It's something which I think a lot of our customers are super excited about, because they have kind of somewhat crufty Jenkins builds, which they've been for what seems like decades. So, and I think as folks have migrated to cloud native workflows, and they're doing Kubernetes deployments, and they're moving like container images around between dev, QA, and production. Doing that stuff with a traditional CI/CD server, it works, but it's not really what it was designed to do.
Right.
The JFrog Pipelines gives you a nice visual look into your build pipeline. It allows you to do trigger-based rules, so you can say, like when a new artifact gets created, or when something passes different stages in the pipeline, then you want to promote it and move it around. And I think for a lot of what people are doing with modern DevOps workflows, it's a much better tool suited for the needs.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah, so I think those are kind of the big announcements from our side. But I guess the general question for you is, you're doing a lot of podcasts with different industry leaders and folks who are driving the DevOps space. So what do you see as the big trends that emerged in 2019, and you think are going to be pushing the industry forward next year in 2020?
Yeah, the thing that I keep hearing most about, I think, from people is just security seems to be a really, really big issue. And, as you kind of pointed out, you get an old package in there, whether it's a Debian package or an RPM package or something like that, that runs on top of the operating system, or it's an NPM package or a Ruby gem or something like that. In the application you're building, you wind up with these security vulnerabilities that you didn't even think about when you installed it, because nobody knew about it. And now you're dealing with, I've got to deal with this thing, or you find out about it because somebody else has it taken advantage of or something like that, So that's one area. I don't know. I mean, there's so much going on. Some of it just comes down to understanding which tool is the right one for the right place, because we have like serverless and we have Kubernetes. A lot of people are still deploying to VPSs. And sometimes any of those are the answer, and it just depends on where you're at. And so a lot of people are just trying to decide, how do I manage all of this infrastructure and understand how everything kind of hangs together for an application?
Yeah. I think one thing in general, which we've seen with a lot of our customers, but I think in general a lot of companies focused on is the cloud has emerged, and there's really three dominant players who have come out on top: Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. But it used to be, when you moved to the cloud, it was okay to just be, move all your stuff to Amazon as workloads, then be locked in on their platform and start picking up features like Lambda, serverless, or other stuff like that. And I think increasingly companies are trying to figure out how to build strategies which allow them to migrate between clouds. So either a multi-cloud strategy where they can deploy to multiple clouds simultaneously, or some way which they can keep themselves lightly tethered to the cloud. Right. Second one is I think companies are also realizing there's certain types of services and information which just they need to keep it on premise, right? They can't they need some hybrid strategy where they can manage sensitive data. They can keep things which they need to have finer grained control over, or which they have like legacy systems tied into on-premise, and then tie that in cleanly with a cloud workflow. And one of the good things about all of the offerings which we have is they're all hybrid and multi-cloud. So you can use exactly the same tooling, the same pipelines, the same integration, and it works the same whether you're using it on top of AWS or on top of Azure. Also works the same when you're using it in-house. And you can set up workflows where you're actually using the same server across multiple clouds and replicating across multiple clouds with high availability, or you're doing it between the cloud and your on-premise data center. So I think that's something which a lot of companies are trying to figure out, is how they can effectively decouple themselves from being locked into a single cloud. And taking serverless as an example, this is why open source or like host it yourself serverless is quite interesting for a lot of companies, because you don't want to get locked in where you're just stuck on Lambdas or stuck on GCP functions, or you're locked into a single vendor implementation. And I think in general, like if you use an open source solution, and there's a bunch of them which allow you to do your serverless entirely with an open source platform, and then host it on your cloud infrastructure of choice. Mm-hmm. FN Project is one example of this. Like Kubeless is another one. There's a bunch of different projects you can use which allow you to get the advantages of serverless without being locked in. OpenFaaS is another one, without being locked into a specific cloud provider.
Yeah, I have heard a few people talking through some of those issues. A lot of folks I talk to, though, they just kind of whole hog embrace one and go for it. But it seems like a lot of the bigger players, they want the flexibility of choosing which cloud they go to, or failing over to one cloud if another one, for whatever reason, has a region go down or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Kubernetes gives you a lot of capabilities to do everything you want to on cloud infrastructure, on hosted infrastructure, while maintaining control over your environments, right? You create the image, you set everything up exactly the way you want it to, and then it's just a deployment target. I want to shoot up to Azure, I want to shoot up to Amazon. You can choose wherever you want to deploy it to.
Yep, makes sense.
And getting back to security, we talked about it a little bit, but there are some really classic fail scenarios if you don't do a good job updating your security vulnerabilities. So, I mean, this made the headlines, but I think Equifax is the classic example of what happens if you don't update your libraries. And it was as simple as they were using an outdated version of Struts, which had a security vulnerability, and one that was actually already known and patched.
Yep.
But between identifying the security vulnerability, which took a couple months, and then patching and deploying to production, which also took a couple months, it was almost 4 months where the security vulnerability was exploitable in the wild. Mm-hmm. And these are the sort of things which can destroy your company if you don't. Actually take advantage of them. And the problem is that as security vulnerabilities get more visibility, right? There's more research companies which are looking into security vulnerabilities on mobile and embedded. Apple has their bug bounty, and people are constantly looking for identifying and also patching security vulnerabilities. You can't wait months to patch a security vulnerability. Right. You probably can't even wait weeks. You have to be able to, within days, respond to and patch critical security vulnerabilities.
Right.
Have you ever felt like JavaScript is just everywhere? Well, we have. We actually had a conversation on JavaScript Jabber about what you can build with JavaScript. We've also talked about what JavaScript is and how we're inspired by the language. If you're interested in JavaScript or doing web development, then you definitely need to check out JavaScript Jabber. You can find it at javascriptjabber.com.
So how do your tools then allow people to, to catch on to that and then to fix those? I mean, and for people who aren't using JFrog or one of your tools, how do they expect to do it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a general class of tools which does a good job of solving this problem. So we offer solutions, other vendors offer solutions, but basically what tools like ours do is they match your dependencies with checksums against a known vulnerability database. So in our case, we use VulnDB from Risk-Based Security. And whenever a new vulnerability comes out, you get alerted that either your code or a dependency of your code or an installed Linux package on one of your Docker images is vulnerable to a new security exploit. And then you have some remediation steps that are recommended. So it might be like, here's a patch or, upgrade to this version, which resolves the issue. And so if you have a security team and if your production system is checked into a binary repository like Aritfactory, then they're alerted whenever a security vulnerability which affects your production systems comes up. And that allows you to take the quickest action to remediate the situation. It could be, doing a patch in production, doing a deployment which addresses the issue, possibly like plugging up a firewall or another security issue which would prevent somebody from exploiting it. So this allows you to respond as quickly as possible when a new security vulnerability comes up.
Right. Yeah, it does sound like, though, with JFrog, one of the things you're doing is you're kind of building. I mean, you've named one of your projects pipeline, and essentially that's what people are looking for, right? Is what's kind of the ideal pipeline for us with the applications we're building and the problems we're solving, and how do we manage that pipeline? And so I guess that's a question that I have for you is just, what do you envision with all these different tools that are available as sort of an ideal pipeline for a company to follow, so that they can manage their operations stack in a sane way?
Yeah, no, so that's a good question. So I think DevOps and the types of tools which people use to address the business needs have changed quite a bit. So I think back 10 years ago when DevOps was first coined as a term by Patrick Dubois, it was really about processes and people trying to figure out how to get the existing operations folks and the developers actually communicating, and through that process coming up with ways to automate and continuously improve, applying a lot of the agile methodologies and agile processes to this synergy between development and operations. And a lot of the early DevOps tooling was developers or operations folks just kind of looking at what they had and saying, well, hey, we have this CI/CD server, maybe Jenkins or whatever it was, and can we automate more of the things which we're doing manually to get software shipped to production, rather than doing manual processes which are prone to break or prone to cause errors. And I think what we've fast forward to 2019 or 2020, and now you have a small team of highly specialized, skilled DevOps engineers, which are supporting dozens or hundreds of teams around the company to try to create a standard infrastructure, automation, and pipelines, which will enable those teams to successfully deploy continuously, make sure that they're actually have a streamlined flow from development through testing, through staging, through production. And doing that in a way which you can support the needs of a large group of developers working on different types of problems, solving different challenges in different business domains. So I think when you're looking at a tool set in a modern corporate culture, it really has to be something which is highly flexible. So it has to solve this range of problems, no matter what language you're using, no matter what technologies you're using. It could be you're supporting a Java team, you're supporting a Python team, you're supporting a Node.js project, you're supporting Ruby developers. It has to cover that gamut of like different technologies that folks are using. It has to give you a single source of truth. So if you're trying to maintain and manage a large set of projects, if you don't know exactly what the state of your system is, if you don't have all of your build artifacts the information about like what was built, how it was built, stored in a single place, then you can't effectively manage the system when something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, you need to troubleshoot this production version that we just shipped, version 731. What was that built with? We have some dependency. We have something which was, some build flag which was triggered. And that's really our core strength is Aritfactory serves as that single source of truth for the DevOps pipeline.
Right.
And I think as we were talking about earlier, you also need to account for security. If you're not building security into your DevOps pipeline and your workflow, then when a problem arises in production or when you have a security issue, your security team, your architecture board, they need the right introspection, the right tools, so they can actually analyze and figure out what the risk is, what the security vulnerabilities are of anything you're going to put in production. So I think if you're looking at that, if you're looking at a strategy which is multi-language, multi-platform, something which provides you that single source of truth, so you can debug and you can work through your system. And then if you're keeping in mind what you need to solve for security challenges or how you're actually doing remediation strategies, then that's most of the equation. And there's a variety of different tools and ways which you can approach the problem. But I think something which is good about tool vendors like us is that we can provide solutions which span different clouds and then also solve your problem on premise as well. So companies like JFrog or other DevOps tooling companies can help companies solve that challenge without locking it into particular infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that you've mentioned a couple times is just, running a hybrid where some of it runs on-prem and some of it runs in the cloud. One thing that I'm a little curious about is that some of it also, falls under certain regulatory things. And so when we're talking about, we're not necessarily talking about security. In some sense, I guess we are, but usually it's data at rest or, different levels of encryption or access or things like that are mandated by things like HIPAA or whatever the financial one that I can't remember the name of right now. But, if you have certain types of data that have to have that kind of check run, but it's not necessarily going to come up as a package vulnerability. It's going to come up as you're not managing this correctly. Do you have options for that as well?
So we also can do checking against, for example, open source licenses or different constraints you might have from an architecture standpoint on the type of dependencies you use. Those typically come up when you do audits, like what's required for HIPAA.
Right.
And I think the other big part of that is making sure that the infrastructure you're running on meets all the regulatory requirements for data at rest, for which countries data is stored at. GPRC puts a lot of limitations on for personal data, your ability to transport it between different countries. So I think this is something which, if you're storing in the cloud, you need to make sure your cloud service is compliant with the regulations. And similarly, if you're doing it on premise, that the data centers you're storing in, how your environments are set up actually is compliant with the regulations. But we can provide some level of security scanning, which will tell you about licensing requirements, which you might have on third-party dependencies, and also, as we talked about earlier, identifying security vulnerabilities, which you need to patch in different regions.
Right. So, what point should I be looking for a solution like what we're talking about here? Because it seems like early on, a lot of times, at least for me, I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. And I kind of throw things together. And then once I have something working, then I start looking at, okay, I want to get this deployed. I want to get, and so then I'm looking for a solution like JFrog, where it's going to build the Docker containers and it's going to do some of the other work that I need done to make sure that, it's meeting the requirements that I have and that I don't have security vulnerabilities. Is this something you want to pull in right away? Or is this something you can kind of wait until it's like, okay, I have a certain level of need?
This is part of the reason why we introduced a free container registry. And we also have Aritfactory OSS, which is a free solution for specifically for Java developers. But if you're getting started with a new cloud native workflow, you're just building a new Kubernetes app. So you can immediately drop in JFrog Container Registry as your Docker repo. Mm-hmm. And right from the get-go, you get all that rich metadata. You can store your images. You can do a lot of this stuff. We're going to introduce some light security scanning as well in the free offering. So you start getting some information on security vulnerabilities. And so this is something that you can get started from day one when you're setting up your Kubernetes workflow. And then, if you have more advanced requirements, like you need, full security scanning that X-Ray offers, or you want pipelines, or you want distribution, or you want all these other advanced features, those are available as well. But I would say for small teams and small projects, our free offerings are really all you need to get started with and to deploy to production at the beginning. So you don't need to buy a lot of expensive commercial tools. You don't need to invest a lot, because until you have that explosive growth where you have tens of thousands of users and you need highly available servers and you need all this large infrastructure, really the most important thing is to have infrastructure which helps you be productive as a team, and also which helps you to identify any issues in production and trace them back to the source. Because that's really what you're doing is, when you have an issue in production, you've deployed something, you're trying to troubleshoot, like I have this performance issue, I have some downtime, or I have some security issues, trying to trace back exactly what was deployed in production and like what composed that build. That's what the JFrog Container Registry and also Aritfactory accomplish.
That makes sense.
About 10 months before we started Ruby Rogues, which is the oldest podcast on devchat.tv, I went freelance. And one of the things that I figured out pretty fast is that I had no idea what I was doing. And I made a bunch of mistakes, but I also made a bunch of friends who were doing freelance, and we got together and we started a podcast called The Freelancer Show. And The Freelancer Show has been running about as long as JavaScript Jabber, but we talk every week about all of the things that we were learning and doing in freelancing and giving people advice on how to get their business started so that they could go out and be independent if that's what they wanted. Nowadays, I'm not on the show anymore, but we have terrific people like Reuven Lerner and Eric Dietrich that come on every week and talk to you about how they run their businesses and give other perspectives on things that you can do. So whether it's how to find clients, or whether it's how to step in and start doing training or other programs, or how to run a business, they have a ton of experience. And they talk about all kinds of things that are going to help you pull things together and be successful as a freelancer. So whether you're thinking about moonlighting and trying it out, or whether you're going whole hog and quitting your job, you should definitely check out The Freelancer Show. And you can find that at freelancershow.com.
So, what's the most common use case? What collection of tools and setup do people generally wind up settling into on JFrog?
The typical case for small teams getting started is they'll have some free or almost free continuous builds. So it could be Jenkins, could be a bunch of other CI/CD vendors. Typically, they'll run the build and then they'll store the output of the build in either Aritfactory or the JFrog Container Registry for containers. And that basic setup, like a CI/CD server plus Aritfactory, does 90% of what you need to do to get started with DevOps and cloud native development. And then I think as you grow and as you start to care about security and other stuff, it scales up with you. But just for getting a basic workflow where you can deploy artifacts to a Kubernetes cluster, you can develop quickly, and you can trace back production issues, that gets you started pretty easily.
Right. So what kind of feedback then does it give you as a DevOps person, or is this mostly just automated? Oh, there's a security issue. We're fixing it. Is that the kind of notification you're going to get, or is it going to ask you first? Or
yeah, so typically the way it would the way people would integrate it with their build is one thing you could do is you could set it up so that when you run your continuous builds, it would throw either a warning or actually failure builds if there's a security issue. So like in the example, let's say I added a new dependency to my project. It pulls in some library which has a security vulnerability, or maybe it's an outdated version. it could immediately, fail the build, kick it back and say, hey, update this library before you continue. And then if you want to inspect what's going on in production or like what the deployed artifacts are, there's a whole management UI where you can dig in and you can see like, for this container image, what are the security vulnerabilities? And you can do the opposite too. You can take a specific known vulnerability and you can find all the artifacts that are stored which have this issue. So it might be that this issue only exists in maybe stage and QA and hasn't made it to production yet. And then you could catch the error before it actually gets promoted into a production issue.
Right. I guess we've talked a lot about things like Kubernetes and those kinds of artifacts that, are going to be created. What about like mobile apps or desktop apps where, you have an installer or, some kind of program that runs on a computer or a mobile phone?
Yeah. So in general, there's 27 different package types, which Aritfactory knows about and knows how to rip apart and support directly. If you check in any of the language modules for, could be C# if you're doing mobile development. It could be JavaScript or Node.js. It could be Java, Go, Ruby. If you check in any actual language wrapped objects, it can understand those and take those apart. Mm-hmm. There's a couple package formats it understands as well. Like we mentioned, some of the installer types, so Debian, RPM, Docker images, etc. And then for anything which is a wrapped bundle where Aritfactory can't directly introspect it, you can output something called build info. So a build info file from your build system. And as long as you list the dependencies which are inside of that artifact type, then it will use that information to do all of the dependency analysis. So it'll scan dependencies from there, and it can also use that for security scanning. So, for example, if you had an awkward artifact type, like let's say those AMI, I think the Amazon bundles for machine images, then if you check in the build info file next to your AMIs, then we know exactly what's in your AMI file directly from your build system.
I got you.
The same thing would apply, like if you want to directly, for some reason, you want to directly check in like a mobile bundle or some other package type, which we don't know how to rip apart. You can check in build info right beside that. Or you could, unpackage it one layer and then we can look at everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then if you have like a .app or and then you built it with React Native, then you can essentially hand off the package.json or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's really cool. So
I think in general, the type of stuff we do for binary repositories, it's becoming one of the table stakes of any DevOps workflow. Mm-hmm. And you see this, right? Because the cloud services are also coming up with their own binary repositories, and there's a bunch of other container registries as well, besides Aritfactory and our JFrog container registry. But I think that just reinforces the need for DevOps engineers to look at a binary repository, either ours or one of the others out there, as part of their standard workflow.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to get started, they can just get started with the Docker repos. They can get started with, some of these other free offerings, and then just kind of move in from there. So, I mean, for anyone doing Kubernetes development, the JFrog container registry is a great place to start. It's entirely free for as many repos, as much network traffic you want to use. No restrictions on deploying to production, so it's entirely free. We also have a cloud-based offering for the same. So you can spin it up on Amazon, Azure, or Google Cloud. And again, we have a free tier for that as well, so you can get started without any cost. Mm-hmm. And then, going down the pipe, we have commercial offerings. So Aritfactory has all the capabilities of the JFrog container registry, plus it supports 27 different package types. Aritfactory Pro X adds an X-ray. And then we have our new pipelines offering, which I think has limited availability right now, but it will be
included with Aritfactory starting. We'll have it in our pricing plan starting in January. Yep.
Good deal. Is there anything else that we should jump on and talk about here while we're chatting?
What do you think, Shravi?
I think you covered most of everything and gave a good overview. So I'm good from our end.
All right, good deal. The way we wrap up the shows is with picks. So it's essentially just a shout out about anything you've been enjoying or doing lately. So you have a favorite accessory for like the Raspberry Pi or something like that, or?
Okay. Well, this is somewhat work related, but
that's fine.
One of my hobbies is just like you're doing a podcast. I do video interviews at conferences with folks, and so recently, actually, just at KubeCon, we launched this thing called the DevOps Speakeasy.
Okay.
And basically what we do is so we're speakeasy themed. So Baruch, myself, and Cap Cosgrove, our newest developer advocate, we all dress up with 1920 to 1930s like steampunk type clothes. We drag random speakers from the conference on camera with us. And we just interview them right there in front of a live audience. So nice. I'd say that's my pick for good fun if you're hanging out on social media or you're looking for something to learn about stuff, but also in a fun and lighthearted way.
That does sound fun. Did you just do that at the JFrog booth, or? Yeah.
So we did the initial pilot at JokerConf in Russia, and they set us up a little area for the interviews with some speakers and an audience area. At KubeCon, we stole half the JFrog booth and just took it over.
Nice.
So that was fun.
Yeah, we'll have to get a link in the show notes for that so people can go watch them. So that sounds like fun. I'm going to jump in with a few picks as well. So the first pick I have, I published a book on Amazon a couple weeks ago. And today, as we're recording this, so, obviously, whenever this gets published, the book is now out on paperback. So you can order a paperback off Amazon.
Yeah, congratulations.
Well, thanks. That's the Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. I know it's a mouthful, but I'm going to write a series, and they're all going to be the Max Coder's Guide to something. So that was the first one. And so if you're out there looking for a job, you can go pick it up.
All right. So I'm gonna put you on the spot because as a now famous author, you get to share one tip for us on how to find our dream job.
So I start out, the first chapter gives you 3 steps that are going to make it easier. And so I'll just throw those at you. The first one is to go find a users group in your area, if at all possible. The reason is because it's much easier to get a job if you know people that work at the company. And so if you're trying to find a job that's local to you, then the people who are really, truly passionate are showing up to those. The other one is to make sure your resume is up to date. And that's not to say that you're going to take that up-to-date resume and pass it around. Please don't. That's what the rest of the book's about. But it does give you a starting off point. And then if somebody says, hey, can you send me your resume? Then you can go do a little bit of homework on the company, tailor your resume to them without having to go in and actually do all the updating, so you can get it to them relatively quickly. And then the last one is to have a side project and put it up on GitHub. And the reason for that is essentially so that you can show people that you're an ongoing learner and they can see where you're at pretty quickly. And
those are all totally spot on. Actually, one of the challenges with hiring people is if people don't have something public where it's their code and their work like online in a GitHub repo, it's almost a competitive disadvantage because you can't see proprietary code, right?
Right.
Why would you hire somebody who you've never actually seen something they've written?
Yep.
And the user group one I'm down with as well. Actually, I run a little boutique JavaFX user group as well in the Bay Area. So.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Yeah, the rest of it is essentially don't send your resume everywhere. Figure out what kind of company you want to work for, and there's a whole process for that. It's relatively simple, but Yeah, you figure out what kind of company you want to work for. You start doing your homework to figure out what companies meet that criteria. And there are ways to do that as well on the internet. And then you go out of your way to meet people who work at the company and you network your way in.
Yeah, no. I mean, the best way to get a job is by folks just inviting you in because they want to work with you.
Yep, exactly.
So that's really good advice. Okay, I hope it does well for you.
Yeah, me too. The other pick I have, so I just set this up on devchat.tv today, is Buy Me a Coffee. So I've had some people asking how they can support the podcasts, and that's a good way to do it. If you go in, select the option to donate monthly. You can donate $1, $3, or $5 a month. And, so it's not a lot. I'm not really asking for a lot. I just have people basically wanting to say thank you and more than just an email. So yeah, that's how you can do that. It helps us, pay to keep the shows running and things like that. So
cool. Okay. And I'll toss in one more pick since we're on the topic of book writing.
Yeah.
I just released a book myself called the Definitive Guide to Modern Client Developments with JavaFX.
Oh, cool.
So that's my little side hobby is hacking and doing cool, in particular UI stuff and embedded development.
Nice. I may have to pick your brain and see who we should get on the Java podcast. That's one that I want to start soonish. So
yeah, no, I can definitely recommend some folks for you.
Cool. All right. Well, if people want to find you online on social media, on GitHub, where do they go?
Yeah. So for all of those, just Steve on Java, all smashed together. And that's my Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, pretty much everything. Just Steve, STEVE on Java.
Good deal. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks for chatting with me for 45 minutes.
Yep. This is awesome. So, thanks very much.
All right. Well, we'll wrap that up. Max out, everybody.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.